Hi, and welcome to Find, Tell, Share, the Storytellers podcast. My name is Jemma Rosenthal and my business is Creative Hearts. I'm a creativity coach, singer-songwriter, dancer, actor, choreographer, author, soon-to-be author and speaker, and poet. So many creative things, and I help people to find their voices. And this is...
Chris Sissons. My business is Market Together, and I am a local marketing coach who specialises in using stories for business development, marketing, and finding the real work that only you can do. We've got an exciting show lined up for you today. We're going to look later in the programme why I don't have the patience for poetry. And Jemma is going to tell us about the genesis of her song, Everything Is You, and then sing it. But before all of that, Jemma, tell us about our guest.
Yes, I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Karen Williams. Karen is the book mentor of Librotas, having started out her business in 2006 and writing her first book in 2009. She knows the difference that writing a book can make to your business when done well. She's worked with hundreds of coaches, consultants, and other business experts who have a story to tell or a message to share, taking them from idea to final manuscript, ensuring that they write and publish a book that helps them to attract more clients, raise their credibility, and show up in a bigger way. Karen is the best-selling author of 8 writing and entrepreneurial books, a TEDx speaker, and motivational coach. So welcome, Karen, to Find, Tell, Share.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today.
That's no problem. We're really excited to have you. What an interesting job title. It's could you explain more about what it is that you do as the book mentor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentor business owners who have got, as you said, a lot of wisdom to share. They've got stories to tell, experiences, expertise. And they often come to me because they want to write a book, but they've got no idea where to start. And I take them through the whole process of finding that perfect idea, finding that hook, the thing that makes them different, through to having the final manuscript written. Now, I do focus on business authors. So a lot of my clients, they're writing self-help books, how-to books, memoirs, books that are aligned to their business. So ultimately, they're helping them to get more speaking engagements, to make a bigger difference in the world, reach more people, and ultimately grow their business. So I take them through the whole process. And then I have a team of people who can help with publishing, PR, and that type of thing as well.
That's fantastic. So do you, when you're starting off with a client, do you start with the idea of the story, or do you just start talking about their business with them? How does it work?
I've got 10 principles that I tend to go through with clients. And the very first one is your vision. What is your vision for your book? Why are you doing it? Because unless you know why you're doing your book and why you're writing it, it probably never happen. And then it's about looking at what they want the book to do for them and their business, who it's for, and then we can start going into the idea and the subject. But you have to be really clear you want to do it before you start it. With any creative project, you need to be able to see the end point and work backwards rather than go, oh, that's a nice thing to do, because it's got to be something that really fulfills you, that you're passionate about as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of starting from the end point and then working backwards is a thing we do in coaching as well. So when I work with clients, it's like getting the vision first and then working back. So you do a similar thing with books, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always look at when they want the book to be published, then we can work backwards from there, because if we work forward, it feels like you've got so much time, but actually if you work backwards, you can set manageable goals and easy chunks of time, because you never quite know how long these things are going to take.
No. So you've written books yourself. What type of books have you written? Have they all been different? Have they had similar themes? What books have you written?
All sorts, really. My first book was a business book. I interviewed successful coaches for that, and I'll talk about that in my story. I won't go into too much detail. I've written books about business, books about writing. I've written a book about book marketing, my own story, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. And my latest two books, I created a planner, a business book planner earlier this year, and a journal. So they're sort of books. So they're the additional two books that you probably didn't know about the last time we spoke.
No, it's amazing how, that ability to think of an idea and actually, put it forth. And because I know a lot of people, especially creative souls, like the people that I coach, is kind of like, you can have so much ideas, but then actually putting it into form is something quite different, isn't it? You have to kind of schedule it out and put it into place.
Yeah, it's all about the planning, and planning for me is key in terms of a book. It's knowing what's going in this book, and ultimately many people have more than one book or more than one creative project, and it's looking at what fits where, because you don't need to put everything in one book, because if you've got a huge amount of experience or various things that you do, actually multiple books might be a good way of doing it, or even a similar book for different audiences. So again, then you're not spreading yourself too thinly by trying to appeal to too many different audiences at the same time.
Yeah. So what kind of clients do you get? You said, you mentioned coaches, consultants, other business experts who have a story to tell, a message to share. I mean, what's the kind of range of people that you get in terms of the type of stories and that kind of thing? The people.
Yeah, I've worked with all sorts of different topics: divorce, funerals, coaching. Actually somebody who was teaching a coaching program, leadership, team building, accounting, cancer, nutrition, para-triathlete story, all sorts of different stories, vision boards. I know you guys have had Mary Nonde. I think Mary Nonde is on your main program. So there's all sorts of different types of books from all sorts of different topics. There's no topic that's out of bounds, really. It's the person who's writing the book needs to have knowledge of their topic to be able to write about it. My job as a coach and a mentor is to facilitate them writing it in the best possible way.
Yeah. So I think, so you take them from the idea to then writing it into the manuscript, and then you said you had a team of people that helps with publishing as well.
Yeah.
So is that all part of your business? Does it all fit into one umbrella, like the passing on, or do they work for different companies? How does it work?
They're self-employed, they work for themselves. I just pass them on when they get to that stage, but it's also giving people that assurity that there's someone else to help them. So I don't do it under my umbrella, because I did that a few years ago, and it could get a little bit complex. Actually, I pass them on, but it's giving people access to the right people who can support them, so they know they've got the right support. Because it's so easy, I think, these days to publish a book that it's easy to get it wrong, it's easy to make mistakes. So my job is to give people the best possible chance of success. I also help with the launch as well, sort of marketing. I'm the author of Book Marketing Made Simple, so I help people through the whole marketing aspect of it as well. But marketing, for me, it's all about marketing from the moment you start writing it, not when you launch it. So all of that stuff, all of the good stuff like interviews, podcasts, social media, there's so much you can do as you write your book to achieve success.
Fantastic. I'm actually so I'm co-author for 2 books that's coming out soon, and so it's quite a new experience for me, writing my story and putting it into a book and having it published. But it's how a lot of the time when I'm thinking about putting into having my own book, it can feel overwhelming, almost like whereas writing a little chapter is a little bit easier. So that was kind of like a first step of, getting out there and seeing how it works. But what would you say to someone like me who might have, had a bit of experience in writing, but wants to go into that next step of writing a book, but might feel kind of nervous about sharing their stories, or like maybe not sure whether they want it to be? So one of the things I'm questioning is, do I want it to just be pure story, or do I want it to be a self-help book, or a bit of both? And like, how do you help people to decide those things?
So I've actually spoken to a couple of people in the last few days, actually, a similar position to you, Jemma, in terms of they've had a story published or about to be published in a book. So they've shared their story. So they've had a taste of it. So that's really nice. And it's kind of a sort of a soft way in. It's really important to know the type of book you're writing before you get started. So there's three main types of books I see. One is your self-help book, your how-to guide, which is kind of practical in as much as it takes people through a process. But ultimately, even within that type of book, you share your story. And I always encourage my clients they might share their story as a prologue if they've been through something that's really changed their life. They might share their story throughout, and also other people's stories might well be appropriate. And then you've got your kind of more autobiographical book, which tends to follow the hero's journey process in terms of it takes people through your story. When I wrote The Mouse That Rules, that's the kind of the process I went through with that book. But I've also got a how-to in it. At the end of every chapter, I've got, things I wish I'd known when I was going through that time in my life. So you're looking at the what people could do as a result of you going through the stuff you've gone through. What can people do? And then the third type of book that you can write, which is slightly different from those, is the interview style book. So if you do, it might be a good thing to suggest, a lot of podcasts, for example, and you've got a lot of material from interviewing other people, you could also write an interview book. And that interview book, interviews can go into a self-help book, interviews can even go into an autobiography, although it's a little bit more tricky there. So, but being clear on that structure before you start is key, and one of the things I advise my clients to do is to validate their information, is to go out to people and say, look, I'm writing a book. What would you want to read? What's your biggest problem? What are you struggling with? What would you want to get from my book? Do you want to find out about my story? Do you want my tips? And then you can work it out from there. So I don't know if that helps you, Jemma.
I think it's helpful. I think so. I mean, I can probably talk to you about my stuff if we have a meeting at some point. So, but it's really good to kind of know how it might work. I think one of the things that me and Chris talk about a lot, and one of the things that I find maybe more difficult, is that structure, because as a creative, I'm very much like we'll work with ideas all the time. So there's like 100 different ideas, and it's just getting it into one or getting it into 3 parts, whatever it is. Like, it's deciding what is necessary. And I really like what you were saying about kind of like asking people what it is they need and what's, but at the same time, there's also that thing, because Chris talks about real work, and sometimes as an artist, you just want to write what's needed for you, and that can actually be what's needed for other people, because if it comes from the heart, then it's going to resonate, which is what I've done with the other two stories. But yes, let's move on to your story now, and we're really excited to hear it, and yeah, off you go.
So, I'm going to talk about The Mouse That Roars, my story. So my story started back in the early 70s when I was an only child. As a child, I was incredibly shy. The door would go, somebody would phone, and I was the person who would hide behind my mum's skirts rather than answer it. And I was incredibly shy, incredibly introverted. At school, I was bullied, I was overweight, and I went through a little bit of a tough time. So it's quite surprising to many people, including myself, that when I went into a career, I chose a people-facing role. I worked in hospitality to begin with. I worked in HR, and I actually started to, still shy, but started to come out of myself and talk to people. But I've always been an introvert, and I don't think that's anything that's ever going to go away. Now, I've got a few turning points in my life, just a few mini stories I'm going to share with you today. And the first thing, I suppose one of the major things that happened to me was back in my early 30s. Having a successful career, I was working in HR at the time, and my boss said to me one day, linking into The Mouse, she said, "I wish you would speak out more." Now, you can take that in a million different ways, and the way that I took it at the time was a bit of I don't know, if I look back now, actually, it's okay, because I think it was something I needed to hear. But back then I went, yeah, maybe I should. But this is me, this is who I am. But I did decide to do something about it. So I engaged my very first life coach, and this is back 11, 12 years ago. So I worked with a life coach, and I thought, look, I need to do something about this. I know the benefit of working with somebody else who can actually see things that you can't see yourself, because we get so close to our own problems, we can't necessarily see the options and the things that are actually available to us. So I worked with her for a few months, and I got 2 interviews. I found a job, and I went to work for another employer. Now, in that other employer, my immediate boss is still a friend now. And I actually felt I was somewhere where I was going to be respected and also going to be able to grow and flourish as well. But that's not the only thing that happened. The big thing that happened when I got that coach is I thought, oh, I found something that I could do. And I decided to train as a coach, and I decided to set up my own business as well as starting that new job. Now, as you'll hear throughout my story, I'm one of these people who I'm not afraid to maybe occasionally take life by the horns and just go for it, despite being shy, introverted. So set up my own business. I trained as a coach. And the problem with being shy, though, is that when I got my certificate, you can almost imagine me stood on my doorstep with my certificate in my hand going, hey, I'm a coach. And it took me a while to really get noticed and actually get my message out there. So we're looking, pre-social media like it is today. So we're looking at sort of, face-to-face networking, talking to people, building relationships. That was the way of marketing yourself back then. But it was a huge learning curve. And I think for any coach, any business owner going into business for the first time, when you've not done it before, even if you're great at your profession, you can struggle with the whole business side of things. So for me, it was a huge learning curve. I did get a business coach. So I did help. I had that helping hand right in the early stages for someone who was a little bit further than me, who knew what they were doing. But those first few years were quite interesting. I had some amazing clients and amazing opportunities, and I did have to put myself out there. I remember one time I got a contract with a pharmaceutical company to deliver some training for them in profiling, personality profiling, which I'd done in my corporate job. And I do remember sort of popping out of the office, because I was at work at the time, sneaking down the stairs and taking the phone call from them. And when they said that they wanted to give me the work, which is many thousands of pounds worth of work, I do remember being absolutely petrified and having to drive up north to Nottinghamshire to actually deliver it. I was really totally out of my comfort zone. But they must have loved it, because they asked me to do some more work for them. So the biggest thing that changed in my life was finding books and finding my voice, I suppose. It was 2009 when I started writing my first book. I was doing my NLP Master Practitioner qualification at the time. And as part of that, you do a modelling project. So you find a group of people who do what you want to do well, and you interview them, you spend time with them, you model what's the difference that makes a difference between the things that they do and the things that you do. So you can find that gap between the two. And I was modelling the mindset behind a successful coaching business, which is a huge topic. Most of my colleagues on the course were choosing really small things. But for me, I chose a really big topic, and I went, why not? I had the opportunity to interview successful coaches in the UK and also in the US. I interviewed Michael Neal, who's quite a big player in the US, Ladina McMahon, who at the time was the chair of the Association for Coaching, Dawn Breslin. I flew up to Edinburgh to interview Dawn. She's an amazing coach. Susie Greaves, who is now Susie Walker, who's editor of Psychology's magazine. So some good big players in the industry. And what they told me changed my life. It changed my business, because they told me things that I never would have thought about in terms of the types of things that you need to do when it comes to business. So there were practical things like niching. There were practical things like knowing your ideal client, but there were also things like mindset. It's mindset in terms of belief in yourself and belief in your abilities. So they're some of the takeaways that I took away from those interviews. And that's why I decided to write that first book, because I knew that I had information to share that I wanted to get out to more people. But as you can imagine, again, like setting up a business, writing a book, it's when you don't know what you don't know at the end of the day. So I started embarking on the project. I had 11 interviews. I had so much information and so much, transcribing then was me literally listening to it and typing it up as I went. So I had loads and loads of information that I had to sift through and decide where it was going to go in the book. So you mentioned about structure, and structure is key. And one of the things I've learned on my journey, how important that structure is before you start writing it. But I really struggled with that myself. I also went through, who am I to write a book? because I find with a lot of people, and I smile when they come to me and say, who am I to write a book, get with the imposter syndrome, because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to go through imposter syndrome and think about, who wants to hear what I have to say? What if it gets bad reviews? What if nobody likes it? And that's why one of the things I suggest now is you do get feedback from other people, cheerleaders, people giving you feedback as you go, so you're on the right track. And there's also the practical stuff when it comes to book, how do you get your book out there? So all of that was going through my mind. But 18 months later, after I started writing that book, I was stood up in front of 70 people at my book launch party. And it was the thing that put me and my business on the map, because it just changed. It changed people's perception of me. Being a published author, back in 2011, 10 years ago, less people were doing it than they are now. So these days you do have the opportunities of having a chapter in a book. You do have the opportunities, so many more opportunities than you had back then. So I was quite unique in terms of being a published author. So it really did change my business, and it changed my life, and it changed me in terms of I had to become more visible. I had to stand out more. I had to start doing speaking engagements. And I'm lucky that I had the support that I did through those, the speaker training, the working with people, and actually sometimes just feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I remember the first talk I gave quite early on is I was, almost hiding behind my PowerPoint. I was clutching my notes. I was going red. But you know what? Now I find it so much easier because I have a framework. Whenever I give a talk, there's a framework behind it, and I think I just have more confidence that I can what comes out of my mouth is going to make sense and actually give what people need, give people what they need. So that was the first book, and I did say never again after that first book, but it wasn't long before I wrote book number 2, and that happened the following year. Now, the following year was quite an interesting year, and I'm just going to cover it briefly because it was a year that changed my life personally. Now, during that year, a friend of mine introduced me to a book by Stephen Levine called A Year to Live. And that book was influential in so many ways, or inspirational in so many ways, because he and his wife looked after terminally ill cancer patients. And the premise behind his book is why wait until your last few years of your life to actually, or few months of your life to actually do something meaningful and do something that is going to impact other people. So there's a group of us that did the project, and that year I decided to step up and do things that scared me on a personal basis. After my husband's been skiing since he was a youngster, and every year I let him go skiing, and that year I thought, well, I'm going to learn. I was in my late 30s at the time. It's so much easier to learn when you're a child, and there's less, there's not so far to bounce. When you're 5'9" like I am, there's a long way to go when you fall down. So I learned to go skiing. I decided to do a parachute jump. And that parachute jump was quite scary because I am absolutely petrified of heights. But again, it's all about, going out of your comfort zone. And my belief is the more you push yourself, the more you go out of your comfort zone, the more you're going to grow. It's an experience that I loved and hated in equal measures. I would never do it again, but it was an amazing experience. And if you haven't done one, I would definitely recommend you do it. I decided to run my very first large scale event. And I thought, it's a 2-day event. I wanted to make it a little bit different. So there's a couple of things I did. I asked a friend of mine who is a firewalk instructor, and I asked him to do a firewalk. And he said, Karen, why don't you train to become a firewalk instructor? Why don't you train to help people to walk on burning hot coals? And I went, I don't think I want to do that. And then I asked myself the question I'd asked myself throughout the whole year. If I had a year to live, what would I do? And I went, you know what? Why don't I do it? And again, those 4 days of training and also running the firewalk later that year, it just helped me to grow as a person. It helped me to have that belief in my abilities. So I think one of the things I've learned over the last 40 odd years is that we have to put ourselves through things that are uncomfortable to grow. We have to put ourselves through things that we don't necessarily want to do. But we also have to realise that we've only got a finite time left on this world. The only sure thing that we've got to face in our lives is death. So how do we actually get through that in the best possible way? Talking about death, actually, I know it's not necessarily the most happiest subject in the world, but that was something that impacted on 2 other things. One is I trained to do the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. I decided to do the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu as part of that project. And I did become quite ill when I did it. So that's probably not necessarily the best experience, but I'm still glad I did it. I'm still glad I went through that experience. But I also lost my father that year as well. So losing my dad to cancer was one of the things that changed me, because it just made me realise that, we have to do the things that we love, which I get a chance to do every day. So since 2014, I have been supporting business owners to get their message out into the world, because I've written six books, a planner and a journal, so that makes 8 books in total. And for me, being able to facilitate other people's stories and being able to facilitate other people's expertise, over the last 7 years since I was asked to do it by many, many people, I have a privilege every day to help people to get their own message out into the world and overcome their fear, overcome their anxiety, overcome their worry, overcome that feeling of I want to write a book and I don't know where to start, overcoming that sort of worry that it's going to take over your life and going to take just too much time. I have a process. I've modelled my own process over the last 7 years in terms of obviously starting from that modelling project for my very first book. I've modelled how I do me and also how clients do them, to find something that works really well but isn't a cookie cutter approach, but gives a little bit of flexibility, because there's always shades of grey at the end of the day. There is never one size fits all. And I love working with people who have a story to tell, because, well, even if you're writing a how-to book, even if you're writing the driest book in the world, you've got a story there. You've got a story that has led you to where you are today. And my job is to not only roar myself, because it's so easy to hide and squeak, but my job is to help other people to roar alongside that. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen. One point that struck me, I too am an introvert, and I've been speaking in public since the 1980s. So that's been a very long time, and I've never really been aware of sort of any form of stage fright or anything like that. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily the world's best speaker, but nevertheless, in fact, I find that audiences really inspire me, and I think a lot of introverts have a similar experience, because it's not that we're afraid of the audience. It's actually, I think, we're afraid, or the fear is about being in unstructured environments and relationships. Ask me to go into a room and just chat generally with people, that fills me with terror. But ask me to go into a room and do something specific and ask people to do, I'm fine. There's no problem at all. And it's the same with speaking. I know what I'm supposed to be doing, and so it becomes a lot easier.
I totally resonate with that, Chris, because so if I know, and preparation is key. I did my TEDx. I did TEDx talk on my story back in 2017, and I was literally, I scripted it so much that I had to descript it just to be able to deliver it on the day. But whereas, I remember one person walked in the door and said, "Oh, I'm just going to wing it." And I went, "Oh my God, just going to wing it. You can't wing it." But for me, I knew exactly how long it was going to take. I was within my 17 minutes, 15, 14 minutes, something like that. But that's just the way I am. If you give me something to talk about that I don't know about, that's when the nerves might kick in. But I suppose, there's a concept of the comfort zone that probably most people have heard of. You're in your comfort zone and everything is safe and everything's fine. And then you've got your stretch zone, which is quite nice to go in. And then, if you go out of your stretch zone, then it can be a bit scary. But we have to stretch ourselves to grow. And then the comfort zone becomes bigger, I suppose.
I was gonna say, like, I suppose I feel very comfortable in the kind of spontaneous realm, and it's something that I really love, performers that can just so a lot of my favorite kind of writers or speakers are people that just speak their truth just on the spot. But at the same time, I think preparation is still necessary in the sense of that, so I can just speak whatever's without much preparation, but that's not because I haven't prepared. It's because my whole life has been a preparation, because I've learned, had so much training and so much wisdom that's come from my life that it's almost like when I create a video, I don't necessarily need to plan it, because I feel like I'm channeling like an energy that's coming through. And sometimes that is more powerful than kind of like me deciding what it is before. And then kind of like, but I see where you're coming from. It is a different way of working, but yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of that kind of way of just kind of channeling energy and speaking like the truth of the moment kind of thing, rather than planning ahead.
Well, I think in a way I did that today, because I kind of knew roughly what I was going to talk about, but I wrote 10, 12 words on a piece of paper, and I went, I don't quite know where this is going to go. Let's just speak my truth and just let's see what comes out. So I did I knew there were 3 keys of things I wanted to talk about, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to meander around those. So so some of the things that came out of my mouth wouldn't have been planned if I'd planned it properly.
It's not necessarily planning everything out so that you're almost reading a script. I find, if I stand in front of a group of people and somebody gives me a topic, I can speak on it. It's just knowing the role that you're expected to play. I do prepare, particularly if it's well, I'm a local preacher, so obviously I do prepare sermons before I preach them. But these days I preach without notes. The notes are at home. And I don't even carry them with me as insurance. Just the order of service, and so I know what's coming next. It's just knowing. It's just being in a row that's clear, and the relationship with the audience is clear, and that's the key thing. So I find doing a video online really hard because I can't visualize the audience. I need the audience.
I've certainly found over the last year or so, whereas I'm so used to giving talks and bouncing off the audience, obviously when you're giving a talk to a Zoom audience, it's slightly different as well, because you don't have the same energy, physical energy of people in the room, and being able to you can catch people's eye, but then it's like, oh, I'm looking at the camera, I'm looking at the person, and then you can't look at everyone. Whereas I think what I love about speaking in front of a group of people is that you can bounce off, and you can go off at different tangents, because you're bouncing off their questions or their thoughts or their energy as well.
It's going to be really interesting when we get back to addressing larger groups, just to see how it feels, I think. But I think I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I think things have changed as well, haven't they? Things have changed, and I think it's so easy to do. And I was on a networking meeting this morning from the comfort of my own office and with people all around the world. So we do get that there is a convenience of that as well. Although there's a I am looking forward to seeing real life human beings as well.
Yeah, well, when the lockdown started, I thought, oh, what a relief to relate to people. And but it's getting a bit boring now. So that's all something for us to look forward to. There's just one point I do want to ask you, Karen, before we move on, and that is, writing a book takes a long time in terms of elapsed time. I would have thought it's rare that you write a book in under 6 months, and it's probably more likely 12 to 18. This is my guess, and correct me, but I'm just wondering, if a business person comes to you and says, I've got all this stuff and I can put it in a book, and here's my plan, does the elapsing of time often mean that the goals sort of shift or disappear? Do you find, how do you, and how can you market something to a business owner where the benefit is so far in the future, an indefinite long time?
Yeah. Well, it's not, Chris, not how I do it. So it's not definitely in the future how I work with clients. So there's a couple of things I'm going to say there. Firstly, is I'm literally just in the process, as the day we record this, launching a 6-month group program to help people to get to final manuscript stage within 6 months. 6 months is a nice time, because it's long enough to feel like you can achieve it. It's not too long, but it's not too short that you think, oh my God, I'm in panic mode. So it's quite a nice time, and I'm really looking forward to getting that started. The second thing, Chris, is I get people results from their book when they start writing it. So I've got examples of clients who have got new clients off the back of their book in the research stage, before they've even started writing a single word, through self-validating and self-funding, that I call it. So for me, yes, the book could be 12 months, 18 months in advance. But actually, when you start to ask people what they want to hear from you, when you start to engage with your audience as you start to write it, that act of saying, oh, I'm writing a book, you're putting yourself into authority mode, and people are seeing you in a different light. So one thing I encourage clients to do is to, not everyone, it depends on the client, but most of them who are running a business, to actually use it as a business building tool as they write it, not just as they publish. From a structure point of view, having a structure to begin with helps, but I'm very much aware that things can move on, things can evolve, the structure might evolve. When I wrote my 6th book a couple of years ago, I suddenly realized one day that I was missing a whole chapter that wasn't in my original plan, but that's okay. It's just having a starting point to get you going.
Yeah. So, have you any more points,
I don't think so. So, Chris, you can go to your part now.
Yep. Yep. Thank you. I'm currently taking up a weekly writing challenge. Somebody publishes a prompt, and I write a story. Usually, we get the prompt on Friday, and I usually write it on Saturday evening. And one of the prompts recently was the place of poetry in my life, and my immediate response to that prompt was, I really don't have the patience for poetry. I mean, the thing about poetry is you get a page with a few lines of words on it, and you're supposed to sit there and work out what it means. And I've not got the patience. It just doesn't. So that was my immediate response. But then I thought, well, I'm supposed to write something. And I began to realise that over the years, I have picked up scraps of poetry, often words that mean something to me and that have stayed with me. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. Is one couple of lines that I trot out with alarming regularity, and it's and there's quite a bit like that that is actually a part of me, and I can quote odd lines from poetry that mean something to me at the drop of a hat, which is a quote from somewhere else. And it's amazing where a lot of the things that we say actually come from. So that's what it means to me. So my first question, and I've got 2 questions to both of you, is what place does poetry have in your life? I don't know who would like to go first.
I'm happy to go first, unless Karen's burning with the answer.
Yeah.
So you can go first. You can go first, Jemma.
I think I was just thinking about, as you were speaking, I think that poetry has influences my songwriting, which I know maybe the next question is that. But also, I write poems myself, and I know a few people that do poetry. And often, I think for me, it's a lot about, so the poetry that kind of sticks in my mind is often spoken word poetry. Things like Maya Angelou, is a massive inspiration to me, kind of just how she speaks and uses poetry to put across a message. So I wrote a poem called As a Woman, just recently, is in the book, actually, The New Woman that I'm going to be in. And I did it as it was spoken word, but I didn't actually speak. I recorded it and then danced to it. But it's similar in style, in the sense of that it's about women's experience. As you know, I didn't directly think of Maya Angelou's poem when I wrote it, but I can see now, looking back, okay, maybe I was inspired by that, her Phenomenal Woman poem, which I just thought was incredible when I first saw her perform it as well. I think for me it's like poetry and movement. So I like the whole kind of merging poetry with other art forms such as dance or music. Although I can read a poem and that's good as well. I just kind of like the performance element of poetry, that it can really like shift something in your mind when you hear someone speak a poem. It can like change how you think, and that's what I'm interested in with poetry.
Karen?
That's interesting, Chris. I think I may have had a similar response to you, because poetry doesn't really have much place in my life, but I love words. I love words, how they can convey things. And obviously you can share words in so many ways, whether it's in a book, whether it's in a blog, whether it's in a poem, whether it's in a song. So I love words, and I think words written well, in whatever format it is, can obviously, it can move people, it can influence people, it can make a difference to people. But poetry itself, I could read poetry, and I like a good rhyme, and I like writing a good rhyme, but not proper poetry. And obviously it takes an art, doesn't it? It's an art form.
Yeah, I wonder what proper poetry is.
That's true.
But the second point that I wanted to make, I read a review of a book by John Burnside. I'll put the details in the chat. I've actually forgotten the title of it, but it's a history of poetry in the 20th century. And the review was written by Rowan Williams, who has been promoted since he stopped being Archbishop of Canterbury into a reviewer for the New Statesman. There's always another step up the ladder, no matter how high you get. It interested me because one of the points presumably made in Burnside's book is that you don't set poetry to music. And the reason you don't set poetry to music is because poetry itself has the music within the lyrics. And I think there's probably some truth to that. I think with song lyrics, the music is a sort of container for the lyrics, and a lot of the rhythm and the emotion is in the music. I'll just give you an example of what I mean. The younger brother of one of my goddaughters, when he was I think he must have been about 13 or 14, learned to play the clarinet. And I heard him, and he played, and he is musically gifted. And I heard him, and he played the Sky Boat song. You know, the da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da da, and he got every note absolutely right. You know, and so I said to him, read the lyrics. And I said, look at the emotion in the lyrics, and now play the tune. And it was completely transformed. It was like a different tune. He was still hitting all the right notes, but he was putting now, don't ask me what that process is. Jemma can probably give us chapter and verse, but there's something about the relationship between the lyrics and the music that is that makes a big difference. And certainly a lot of the poetry in my life are actually song lyrics. And part of it is when you remember the tune, often the words come back as well, and you think, I never knew I knew that. I was wondering again, I think it's telling us something about the relationship between poetry and song lyrics, and I think part of what Williams and Burnside are getting at is with poetry, you don't have to be constrained by the music. You can arrange the verse on the page so the way it looks on the page is a part of it. You can also use different rhythms, or maybe the same rhythm within a particular poem. There are all sorts of options that you have. So shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate, is actually an iambic pentameter. And iamb is didum, and pentameter means 5 times, so it's didum, 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 didum. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate. So you've got that sort of underlying structure in there. Now that is also true in song lyrics, but I think the point about a poem without music is that the music within the words is what's really makes that poem as moving as it is, and it doesn't need a musical accompaniment. But is that right? What do you think?
Any thoughts, Karen, or do you want me to go? Okay. Well,
I'll let you go.
I think that poetry can be set to music, in my opinion. I do it a lot. But I think that's because I do agree that it has its own music as well. I think that that's the beauty of poetry, is that it can be without music, and you can just hear the music in the silence between the words. I can't remember the person that there's a quote about that, something about the beauty is in the silence between the words or something. But yeah, I think the song lyrics can have their own poetry. Sometimes I write poems and then turn them into songs, and sometimes I write songs and turn them into poems. So I know in Madeline's episode of the podcast with Madeline, I think it's episode 5, which you can go back and listen to if you're listening. But I wrote a song specifically for that podcast, and I started with the music. It was just 2 notes. Dun, 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 dun. I started with some song lyrics came through and some melody, and then a poem just came out. So in that sense, I didn't sit down to write a poem. It's just that the music told me that this was going to be a song poem. And that was what was called for in that moment. And then I added some artwork as well to some drawings to a video, which I've just put up on my YouTube. The channel is Jemma Rosenthal if you want to hear more songs. But yeah, I think there's beauty in everything. And I think the one thing that I always think about is that anything that limits anything, in my opinion, that's not the essence of art. The essence of art is that it can be anything. So that would be my opinion. I know that structure is good. So as in, like, for example, if you're writing a song, you have structure in it. But I think that the structure should be dictated by the art itself. So the art should tell you what the structure is, not us telling art what structure is. So for example, with that one, like, it was like I listened, and the song is called I Will Listen, and I listened to see what's the most effective structure for this specific song. And I didn't know before. I just listened, and then the poem was given, and then the song was given, and the melody, it all kind of came together in a structured way. But I didn't decide before that that's how it was going to be. It just happened. I know that's the kind of the opposite of what Karen's been saying, and I'm sorry, Karen, but I'm not devaluing your style of working. I think it's good as well to have some time. I've had structure with the books that I've been writing with other people, so they've given me what it needs to be before, as in, like, this is what we want the chapters to be about. For example, one of the books is about COVID stories. So I knew before I was going to write it that it was going to be stories about COVID, so, and the other one was like inspiring stories for women and overcoming. So I knew before it was going to be about that. And I think when you're working with other people, sometimes that's the way it has to be. But I know when I'm creating for myself, I'm just very open with it, and I don't know, the structure just tends to come without me thinking about it. But that's just, I don't know, that's just how I work. Any thoughts on that, Karen?
Well, I think you know that there ultimately needs to be there are various elements that need to come together. So whether you start with the elements or you end with the elements, it's about bringing it together. And you know that there needs to be some sort of framework. Is probably a little bit too stiff, but you know there needs to be there are various parts of it that makes up the whole.
Do you have any more thoughts? If you want to carry on,
I was going to say we'll just move on, but just one final thought before we move on. Very recently, Bob Dylan, who's been, I think he's 80 this week or thereabouts, received the Nobel Prize for Poetry for his song lyrics. So maybe Rowan Williams didn't quite get it right.
Exactly.
Who knows?
But everyone's got their own opinion at the end of the day, haven't they? Even in terms of any poetry, writing, songs, everyone's got the ability to express themselves.
But a lot of it is about. But part of what we're trying to do on this podcast, it's about storytelling, but it's also about an artistic approach to business and understanding art. And you know what we've been discussing now, I think, is really part of finding the inspiration we need for new areas for business, or just for having a good time, I suppose. Anyway, Jemma's getting the piano out.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I wrote the song. So I went through an experience. Often I write songs to heal what I'm going through, and I had an experience where I was going out with someone, and then they decided to go out with another person who I knew and thought I was becoming friends with, and the experience was quite heartbreaking, kind of. But the song is not specifically really about the experience itself. It's more a question and a healing process. But then I wrote the song, and then it was specifically like it was written from the I. So it was, I'm sitting in a room and I'm feeling cold, and I'm wondering if I'll think this way when I'm older. I don't want to feel the pain of not trusting, but I know it's what I've got to do, and I'll love anew, because everything is you, and you are everything, and everything is me, and so I sing. So it came, that's how it was written to begin with. And there is that version written from the I perspective, which is on YouTube, because I film myself singing it. And then I had some singing sessions with a songwriter called Sarah J. Hawley, whose song you can actually hear. She wakes up Neo in The Matrix, interestingly. Because she was in Massive Attack. But I did some songwriting. I was in her music videos as well. But I did some songwriting sessions with her. And she suggested, instead of making it all about me, like I, from the I perspective, to try it, just switch it to you. And just see what that does to the perspective. So now the song is written from the you perspective. And so it's more about reaching out to someone that may have been through a similar experience, and saying, like, you can get through this. It's, you can love again, kind of thing. And everything is you, and you are everything. And that's the message of it. It's way kind of more spiritual than that. If this is what I do with songs all the time. I go through an experience, a very human experience, and then the song becomes a very spiritual experience in my experience anyway. Anyways, here is the song. It's called Everything Is You. You're sitting in a room and you're feeling cold, and you're wondering if you'll think this way when you're older. You don't want to feel the pain of not trusting, but you know it's what you need to do when your lover knew. 'Cause everything is you. You are everything, and everything is me. And so I sing, let's break the barriers, be love warriors. It's not enough fear, we're not even near each other. We can find a better way again, 'cause everything is you. You are everything, and everything is me. And so I sing, everything is you. You are everything, and everything is me. And so I sing, you're sitting in a room and you're feeling cold, but you've decided you won't think this way when you're older. So that was part of the song. That wasn't the whole song. I just realized that there's more to the story in the second verse, but never mind. That's what happens when you don't plan stuff. So that's important to remember, to properly think things through. But yeah, that's a part of the song.
Yeah. A couple of points, Jemma, about changing from I to you. It's really interesting advice, because I had that. I can't remember who gave it me or where I got it from, but I had the advice about marketing copy, and you should address your market you. So you write it in the second person, presumably for very similar reasons. That's an interesting insight. But it certainly does. It's certainly strange how making what is actually quite a simple change can actually change the whole meaning and the feel of the song. But the question I wanted to ask you was the title of the song is "Everything Is You." Was it always "Everything Is You"? So you had you in the title.
Originally, the idea was like, it's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit embarrassing, the first kind of idea, but it doesn't matter. It was how I was feeling. So, the second verse, the reason why I was talking about the second verse is because that changed. The lyrics changed on that one more dramatically. So it used to be, to love me, feel me, please don't leave me lonely again, because everything is you and you are everything. So it was like, it was that heartbreak kind of thing of like not wanting to be lonely, not wanting to be alone. Please, it was more of a kind of cry to God as well. Like, please don't do this to me again. Like, this is too painful. But then the second, the second way of doing it goes like this: to love you, feel you, you can make it through again, because you are everything and everything is you. So, as you can see, a very different message. Neither is right or wrong, they're just expressions of a particular feeling. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's interesting, isn't it, that very simple change, I to you, and adjusting, any idiot could do that. It's a mechanical task almost. But the feeling, the emotion changes as well, which is quite a different thing. And presumably someone else singing it, somebody took your song and covered it, they might bring out something quite different.
Karen, any thoughts? Or I don't know. Go.
Yeah, well, I do actually, because I think, as Chris was saying, in terms of marketing, you often use you, and I can really see the power change when you change the lyrics, and it was just subtle change. And I heard a piece of my own writing critiqued recently, and the person who critiqued it just changed a couple of things, so very similar. And it was just amazing how much more powerful it was just by someone objective who wasn't in it, was recognising some of the things that needed to change. So I think that's why we do what we do, isn't it, in terms of we get people to support us and and to point out those things, because sometimes we think, of course I'm using you, and then you look at it and go, oh no, I wasn't, was I? So again, I think it was a lovely song, and I like the switch.
And there's also another point though, if I can capture this. Often when you're, say, writing a science paper or something like that, making a tiny change like that brings everything together, and makes it a lot clearer what that's about. But in an artistic environment, that small change actually opens up the song to more interpretation, the divergent, that's
it is
interesting.
I still love the original version, is because, like I said, like people have watched the original version and they do tend to really like it as well. So but I think it's just interesting how you can change something and it brings out a different element, and it does feel more relevant to how I feel now. So when I sing that song now, it's an empowering song, whereas when I sang the song before, it's more of a healing song, if that makes sense. So it's more of going through the emotions and feeling them, and both stages are important. So I think sometimes when you're going through certain things, sometimes you do need to use that, this is how I'm feeling. And I think it's empowering to say that, and to say, this is happening to me. Because sometimes people disassociate so much that they go, I often hear speakers and they'll use the word you so much. And I think, I just find it irritating, because I'm just like, but what, like, if they could empower themselves more. Sometimes speakers overuse it, and then it's like, well, I want to hear it from their perspective. Do you understand? Rather than, because sometimes they'll tell their own story, but they're saying, when you go through this and this happens to you, and I'm thinking, well, it didn't happen to me, it happened to you, and I want to know your story. Do you understand? So it has to be done cleverly, I think.
Yeah. It doesn't always work.
Yes. When it's very personalized as well, if someone says, it can, I don't know, it depends on who's speaking. But one time I remember I was doing that, and someone said to me, why are you doing that? Why don't you just say from your own perspective rather than saying it as you? But I think both ways work, depending on. And it's deciding, again, like what Karen said earlier, about what does the audience need in that moment.
That's one of the power of being a good communicator, isn't it? Is it's being able to give the audience what they need, or what you think they might need, and just use it comes from the heart, the intuition. It doesn't necessarily come from the cognitive process. It comes from what you're feeling in the moment,
or what the audience is feeling in the moment. Because that's one of the points about storytelling, is that the only reason why you focus on storytelling is for the benefit of the audience. If you walk into a business network meeting and you tell the story about something that happened on your journey in, it's you're really just getting it off your chest. It's not. But if you want to make a point, whether that's sales or something else, then the focus, it's not so much on the words, it's on the audience. What do they need? What are they going through at the moment? Are they bored? Are they excited? Are they asleep? And you pick that up. As we were saying earlier, you pick that up almost subconsciously.
So, if Karen, we're getting to the end of the podcast now, and thank you so much for being on this podcast and telling your story. How can we if people want to find out more about your work, Karen, how do they go about it?
Yeah, you can get my books are available on my website, on Amazon, all good bookstores. You can find me at librotas.com, which is Librotas, so Libro as in book, tas, which is the end of Libertas. So it's about freedom. That's where that word came from. So it's a made-up word. So librotas.com. You can find me on all the social media sites, either as Librotas or Karen Williams Librotas. So yeah, freebies on my website, books on my website, and reach out to me if you've got any questions, or if you've enjoyed this podcast and want to find out more, or want to talk poetry, get in touch.
So Chris, how do we get in touch with you if people are listening?
Yeah, well, all the details are in the show notes for all three of us, I do offer coaching in storytelling, and I can coach you if you are a business startup, if you're an established business, or if you are exploring real work, and there will be more detail about that coming out in the near future. In the meantime, I also run something called Telling Stories, Making Business, which is usually on second and fourth Thursdays, 2 p.m. on Zoom. And that's an opportunity to hear a business person tell a story, and then to offer them feedback, which is a great way of developing your own storytelling skills. And I'm always looking for storytellers, so do contact me if you are interested.
Yep.
How about you, Jemma?
I am on different platforms: Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, Twitter, most of the platforms. And you can find me under Jemma Rosenthal for my music and dance pages, and you can also find me under creativehearts.coach on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube as well. There's YouTubes for both of those, Jemma Rosenthal and Creative Hearts. And you can also do one-on-one coaching with me, creative coaching, find your voice coaching, or you can do group workshops, which is every fourth Friday of the month. And yeah, the links will be under the show notes. So that is the end of our podcast. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for listening.
Goodbye.